Mother Bear kept visiting this human baby. Daily, the reason was shocking. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The ancient pines whispered secrets as dawn broke over the small cottage at the edge of Whispering Woods. Inside, baby Noah slept peacefully in his handcrafted oak crib, tiny fingers curled into fists, his breath creating small clouds in the crisp morning air. Rachel Morgan gazed lovingly at her 6-week-old son, adjusting the knitted blanket her grandmother had made decades ago. The cabin had been in her family for generations, passed down from mother to daughter, each adding their own touches while preserving its rustic charm. Rachel's husband, Daniel, was already outside chopping wood for the day's fires. The November chill demanded constant warmth, especially with a newborn in the house. Their decision to raise Noah in this remote setting had raised eyebrows among friends and family, but Rachel couldn't imagine a more perfect place for her son to grow up, surrounded by nature's wonders rather than the city's chaos. A sudden silence fell over the forest. The usual morning chorus of birdsong abruptly ceased, leaving an eerie stillness that made the hairs on Rachel's arms stand up. She looked toward the window, drawn by some instinct she couldn't name. That's when she saw it. 2 dark, intelligent eyes peering in through the frost-kissed glass. Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized what she was seeing. A massive brown bear standing on its hind legs, front paws resting against the windowsill. It wasn't clawing or growling, just watching her baby. "Daniel!" she screamed, instinctively positioning herself between the window and Noah's crib. The baby stirred at her cry but didn't wake. Daniel burst through the door seconds later, axe in hand. "What is it? What's wrong?" Rachel pointed a trembling finger toward the window, but the bear had already dropped back to all fours. There was a bear, a huge one, looking in at Noah. Daniel rushed to the window, peering out into the tree line. "There," he whispered, pointing to a large shape lumbering away through the underbrush. "That's the biggest bear I've ever seen around these parts." They spent the morning securing windows and doors, calling the local ranger station to report the sighting. Ranger Patterson assured them bears rarely approached human dwellings unless attracted by food. "We don't leave anything out," Daniel insisted. "We've been careful about that since moving in." "Well, keep your eyes open," the ranger advised. "If it returns, call us immediately." But something about the bear's behavior troubled Rachel deeply. It hadn't seemed aggressive or hungry. It had seemed curious. As she rocked Noah to sleep that evening, she couldn't shake the image of those deep brown eyes, so intent and somehow knowing as they gazed at her child. "It was looking at him, Daniel," she whispered as they prepared for bed. "Not like it wanted to hurt him, like it was checking on him." Daniel squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "Bears don't check on human babies, Rach. It was probably just confused by our scent or the lights." Rachel nodded, but deep down, she knew something extraordinary had happened. Something she couldn't yet explain. As she drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with dark woods and watchful eyes, and the strange sensation that something ancient and wild had recognized something in her child. What she didn't know then was that the bear would return the very next day, and the day after that, beginning a chain of events that would change their lives forever. The morning light filtered through the curtains as Rachel prepared breakfast, her movements mechanical as exhaustion weighed on her. Noah had been unusually fussy throughout the night, his tiny face scrunched in discomfort despite her best efforts to soothe him. Outside, the first snowfall of the season had blanketed the forest in pristine white, transforming their secluded property into a winter wonderland that would have normally filled Rachel with wonder. "I think we should call Dr. Martinez," she said as Daniel entered the kitchen, dark circles under his eyes matching her own. "Noah's fever hasn't broken since midnight." Daniel frowned, gently placing his hand on their son's forehead. "You're right, he's burning up. I'll try to get through, but the snow might have knocked out the phone lines." Rachel's anxiety mounted as Daniel repeatedly failed to connect with the town's only pediatrician. The nearest hospital was 40 miles away, an impossible journey with the roads likely impassable after the snowstorm. She paced the living room, cradling Noah against her chest, his whimpers growing weaker in a way that terrified her more than his previous cries. "Come on, little one," she whispered, tears threatening. "You need to fight this." A sharp crack from outside startled them both. Daniel moved to the window, pushing aside the curtain. "It's back," he breathed. Rachel joined him. Noah clutched protectively against her. There in the snow stood the massive, brown bear, even more imposing against the white backdrop. This time, it wasn't alone. At its side was a smaller bear, not a cub, but younger, its coat a lighter shade of brown. "That's strange behavior for bears in winter," Daniel murmured. "They should be hibernating by now." As they watched, transfixed, the larger bear, unmistakably female, approached the house with deliberate steps. She stopped at the porch steps, rose onto her hind legs, and let out a soft, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl. Noah stirred in Rachel's arms, his cries momentarily subsiding. "Daniel," Rachel whispered, an impossible idea forming. I think she's trying to tell us something." "Bears don't communicate with humans, Rachel." But Daniel's voice lacked conviction. The scene before them defied conventional explanation. The female bear dropped back to all fours and pawed at the snow, exposing something dark beneath. She repeated the action, then looked directly at the window where they stood. "I'm going out there," Daniel said suddenly. "Are you insane?" Rachel grabbed his arm. "That's a wild bear. If she wanted to harm us, she would have broken through that window yesterday." Daniel gently freed himself from her grip. "Something isn't right here, trust me." Rachel watched in horror as Daniel carefully opened the front door, stepping onto the porch with measured movements. The bear didn't charge. She didn't growl. She simply watched, those intelligent eyes fixed on Daniel's face. "What do you want?" Daniel asked softly, feeling ridiculous talking to a wild animal. The bear turned away, taking several steps toward the tree line before looking back, as if expecting Daniel to follow. When he remained frozen on the porch, she returned, repeating the behavior. "She wants me to follow her," Daniel called over his shoulder to Rachel, who stood trembling in the doorway. "Please don't," she begged. But even as the words left her lips, Rachel felt a strange certainty that this was somehow connected to Noah's sudden illness. "I'll stay within sight of the house," Daniel promised, stepping into the snow. The bear led Daniel toward a cluster of pine trees about 50 yards from the cottage. There, partially buried in snow, Daniel discovered a small plant with distinctive purple berries. The bear pawed at it insistently. When Daniel returned to the house, his face was ashen. "Rachel, check Noah's toys and blankets. Look for any small purple berries." Rachel's blood ran cold. "What is it?" "Belladonna, deadly nightshade. It's highly toxic, especially to infants." Daniel held up a small plastic bag containing several of the berries. "The bear was showing me these. I think Noah might have somehow gotten hold of one." Racing to Noah's crib, Rachel carefully inspected every item. There, stuck to the underside of his favorite stuffed rabbit, was a crushed purple berry, its juice staining the fabric. She remembered now. She'd taken the toy outside to dry after washing it 2 days ago. The nightshade must have been growing nearby. "Daniel, call poison control," she cried, holding up the toy. "We need to know what to do." As Daniel frantically tried the phone again, Rachel looked out the window. The two bears remained at the edge of the clearing, watching the house with what could only be described as expectancy. "The line's dead," Daniel reported grimly. "The storm must have taken down the power lines." Rachel made a decision that defied all logic. Wrapping Noah securely in his thickest blanket, she headed for the door. "What are you doing?" Daniel demanded. "She knew," Rachel said simply. "The bear knew what was wrong with Noah. Maybe she knows how to help him, too." Outside, the cold air bit at Rachel's cheeks as she cautiously approached the waiting bears, Noah cradled against her chest. Daniel followed close behind, ready to intervene if necessary. The female bear observed them with those eerily knowing eyes, then turned and began walking slowly into the forest, looking back repeatedly to ensure they followed. "We can't just follow a wild animal into the woods," Daniel protested, but his arguments sounded hollow even to his own ears. Their son was growing weaker by the minute, and conventional help was unavailable. "Do you have a better idea?" Rachel asked, already taking steps to follow the bear. "We're running out of options." Deep in the forest, in a small clearing sheltered from the snow by overhanging branches, the bear stopped. She pawed at a patch of green plants with small white flowers, then looked meaningfully at Noah. Daniel knelt to examine the plant. "This is wild ginger," he said in amazement. "My grandfather used it for stomach problems. It can induce vomiting." With trembling hands, Rachel and Daniel prepared a weak tea from the plant, cooling it before carefully administering small amounts to Noah. Within 20 minutes, the baby had expelled the toxin, his fever gradually subsiding as color returned to his tiny cheeks. Throughout the ordeal, the two bears remained at the edge of the clearing, watchful and present. As Noah's condition improved, Rachel found herself overwhelmed with gratitude toward these wild creatures who had, inexplicably, saved her child's life. "How did they know?" she whispered to Daniel as they made their way back to the cottage, Noah sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. How could a bear possibly understand what was happening? Daniel shook his head, watching as the bears followed at a respectful distance. "I don't know, but I think we need to find out." Back at the cottage, as night fell and Noah rested comfortably in his crib, Rachel searched through an old trunk containing her grandmother's belongings. There, in a weathered leather journal dated 1952, she found something that made her heart skip a beat. "Daniel," she called softly, "I think you need to see this." The yellowed page contained a detailed drawing of a female bear with distinctive markings that matched those of their unusual visitor. Beneath the drawing, in her grandmother's elegant script, were the words, "Athena and her cub, 1 month after rescue. The bond formed today will never be broken. Life for life, heart to heart." Rachel turned the page with trembling fingers, beginning to read an extraordinary tale that would finally explain the mysterious connection between her family and the watchful bear who had saved her son's life. The journal entries began in the spring of 1952. Rachel's grandmother, Eleanor Morgan, had been just 23 years old then, newly married and living in the same cottage where Rachel and Daniel now resided. Her detailed accounts painted a vivid picture of a different time, when the forest stretched farther and human settlements were fewer. "April 17th, 1952, Rachel read aloud to Daniel, who sat beside her on the worn leather sofa, occasionally glancing at Noah sleeping peacefully in his crib. "Found a bear trap today while gathering herbs near the eastern creek. The cruel metal teeth had clamped around a young bear cub's leg. The poor creature was terrified, bleeding heavily but still fighting for life. No sign of the mother bear. Poachers have been active in these woods again, despite Thomas's warnings to the authorities. Rachel paused, looking up at Daniel. Thomas was my grandfather. Daniel nodded, encouraging her to continue. I couldn't leave the cub to suffer. Rachel continued reading. Using Thomas's hunting gloves and my shawl, I managed to release the trap and wrap the cub's mangled leg. She fought at first, then seemed to understand I meant no harm. The wound is severe. I fear the leg may be lost. Brought her home hidden in my gathering basket. Thomas was furious at first, said I was risking both our lives by bringing a wild bear into our home. But when he saw her suffering, something changed in his eyes. "One night," he said, "then we find her mother or alert the Forest Service." The next several entries detailed Eleanor's desperate attempts to save the cub's life. She had named her Athena, after the goddess of wisdom, noting the intelligence in the young bear's eyes. Thomas, who had medical training from his time in the war, had helped set the shattered leg, but infection had already set in. April the 22nd, 1952, Rachel read, her voice catching. Athena's fever grows worse. The infection has spread despite the penicillin Thomas acquired from Dr. Harlow in town. She won't eat, barely drinks. I find myself praying for this wild creature as fervently as I would for a child. Thomas no longer speaks of sending her away. He sits beside her for hours, monitoring her breathing, changing her bandages. Something profound is happening to us both. This connection to a wild creature, this responsibility for a life so different from our own. Daniel shifted closer, wrapping an arm around Rachel's shoulders as she continued reading. The entries grew more intense as Eleanor described trying increasingly desperate remedies to save the dying cub. April 25, 1952. Dawn breaks after the longest night of my life. Athena's breathing had grown so shallow, I feared each exhale would be her last. In desperation, I ventured deep into the woods at midnight to seek out old Martha. Rachel looked up. Old Martha? My mother mentioned her sometimes, a Native American woman who lived alone in the forest. People called her a witch, but Mom said she was just a healer who preferred solitude. What happened? Daniel urged, completely absorbed in the story. Martha listened to my pleas and gave me a mixture of herbs I didn't recognize along with specific instructions. Rachel continued reading. She said, "This medicine comes with a price. Saving a bear's life binds your spirits together. The debt of life must be honored across generations. Are you prepared for such a bond?" I didn't fully understand, but agreed without hesitation. Martha looked at me for a long moment, then added something that chilled me. The bear remembers. The bear always remembers. The journal described how Eleanor had administered the mysterious herbal remedy to Athena, staying awake all night to monitor the cub. By morning, the fever had broken. Over the following weeks, the cub regained strength, though she would always walk with a slight limp on her right front leg. May 30th, 1952. The day I've both anticipated and dreaded has arrived. Athena is strong enough to return to the wild. Thomas built a special enclosure in the back of our truck to transport her deep into the forest, far from trappers and hunters. The release was more difficult than I imagined, not physically, but emotionally. As we opened the enclosure, Athena hesitated, looking back at me with those intelligent eyes. I swear there was gratitude there and something more, a recognition, an understanding. When she finally lumbered away into the trees, I wept as though losing a child. Rachel turned the page, her hands trembling slightly. June 15th, 1952. The most extraordinary thing happened today. I was hanging laundry when I felt a presence watching me from the forest edge. There stood Athena, nearly twice the size she'd been when we released her. More shocking still was the massive female bear standing beside her, unmistakably her mother. They watched me for several minutes, neither threatening nor afraid. Before departing, the mother bear rose on her hind legs, looking directly at me in what felt like acknowledgement. Thomas says I'm being fanciful, but I know what I saw. The mother knows what we did for her child. The journal entries continued, documenting occasional sightings of Athena over the years. Then came an entry that made Rachel gasp. October 3rd, 1953. Our daughter arrived today after 18 hours of labor. The midwife had begun to fear for both our lives when the bleeding wouldn't stop. Thomas rode desperately for Dr. Harlow, but I knew he wouldn't return in time. In my delirium, I thought I imagined the large shape at the window, Athena, now fully grown, watching. The midwife was terrified, but I felt only calm. Within minutes, the bleeding slowed, my strength returned. Dr. Harlow arrived hours later to find mother and child doing remarkably well, calling it a miracle. Outside our window, I found fresh claw marks in the earth beside a cluster of yarrow plants, known to stop bleeding. The bear remembers. Rachel looked up at Daniel, her eyes wide. The daughter she's talking about, that's my mother, Carolyn. So your grandmother saved a bear cub's life, Daniel said slowly. And years later, the bear somehow helped save your mother's birth. It sounds impossible, Rachel admitted. But after what we've witnessed today, she ran her fingers gently over Noah's sleeping form. Rachel continued reading, discovering that Athena had been spotted periodically throughout her grandmother's life, often during significant family events. Her mother's childhood illness, her parents' car accident on an icy mountain road, her own birth. Each time, the bear's presence seemed to coincide with dangers narrowly avoided or assistance mysteriously provided. The final entry was dated just weeks before Eleanor's death 5 years ago, September 12, 2019. I am not long for this world. The doctors give me months, but I feel the truth in my bones. It will be weeks. Today, as I sat on the porch watching what may be my final autumn, she came to me one last time. Athena, ancient now, her muzzle gray, that familiar limp more pronounced with age. Our eyes met across decades of shared history. She brought her family, 2 younger bears who watched respectfully from the tree line. I understand now what Martha meant all those years ago. The debt of life creates a bond that transcends generations. When I am gone, they will watch over my children's children. The bear remembers. Rachel closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. She died 3 weeks after writing this. The doctors said it was heart failure, but she knew. So, the bears outside, Daniel began. Must be Athena's descendants, Rachel finished. And somehow they recognize Noah as Eleanor's great-grandson. They're still honoring that life debt. She looked out the window into the darkness, where she knew the bears were keeping vigil. The bear remembers. A soft cry from Noah's crib pulled them from their reflections. As Rachel moved to comfort him, Daniel remained at the window, watching the silent guardians in the moonlight. There's something else, he said suddenly. Your grandmother wrote that old Martha said the debt must be honored across generations. What if this isn't just about protection? What if there's something more we need to understand? Rachel held Noah close, her mind racing. Tomorrow we need to find old Martha, or whoever might have taken her place. There's more to this story, Daniel, I'm certain of it. What they couldn't see from inside the warmth of their cottage was the third bear that had joined the others at the forest's edge, larger than the rest, with distinctive gray around her muzzle and a noticeable limp in her right front paw. Athena had returned one final time, drawn by ancient bonds and promises yet to be fulfilled. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the fresh snow glittering in the sunlight. Rachel was up early, Noah fed and content in her arms as she gazed out at the pristine landscape. The bears were gone, but their tracks remained, clear evidence that the previous day's extraordinary events had not been a dream. Daniel emerged from the bedroom, already dressed in warm layers. I called Ranger Patterson while you were sleeping. The phone lines are back up. I didn't tell him about everything, just that we needed information about someone named Old Martha who used to live in these woods. What did he say? Rachel asked, shifting Noah to her shoulder. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "There's a woman named Martha Redfeather who lives about 5 miles north of here. She's in her 80s now. Could be the daughter or granddaughter of the Martha your grandmother knew." Rachel nodded, determination settling over her. "We need to speak with her." "I thought you'd say that," Daniel replied, reaching for his heaviest coat. "I've already asked our neighbor Jack to plow our access road. He should be here within the hour." As they prepared for the journey, gathering supplies for Noah and extra layers against the biting cold, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Twice she caught glimpses of movement at the tree line, not threatening, but vigilant. "They're still out there," she told Daniel, "watching over us." Daniel nodded, no longer skeptical after all they had witnessed. "I feel like we're being guided towards something," he admitted. "Like there's a purpose to all this that we don't fully understand yet." By mid-morning, they were making their way along snow-covered forest roads in their sturdy SUV, Noah securely fastened in his car seat. The journey to Martha Redfeather's home took longer than expected, the vehicle struggling through drifts that the plows hadn't yet reached. The road eventually narrowed to little more than a path, forcing them to continue on foot for the final quarter-mile. Daniel carried Noah in a front pack, while Rachel clutched her grandmother's journal inside her coat. Martha Redfeather's home appeared suddenly through the trees, a small, well-maintained cabin with smoke rising steadily from its chimney. Before they could knock, the door swung open, revealing a slender elderly woman with silver hair in a long braid and eyes so dark they seemed to contain the night sky. "I've been expecting you," she said simply, her voice surprisingly strong. "The bears told me you were coming." The interior of Martha Redfeather's cabin was warm and fragrant, with herbs hanging from the ceiling beams and a pot of something aromatic simmering on an ancient wood stove. The walls were lined with books, some appearing centuries old, their spines cracked and faded. Animal skulls, beautifully preserved plants under glass, and stones of various colors adorned the shelves between the volumes. "Please, sit." Martha gestured to a cluster of handmade chairs arranged near the hearth. "The little one looks tired from your journey." Rachel and Daniel exchanged glances, both startled by the woman's calm acceptance of their unexpected arrival. As they settled into the chairs, Martha reached toward Noah with weathered hands. "May I?" she asked, her dark eyes fixed on the baby. Though they had only just met this mysterious woman, Rachel found herself nodding, instinctively trusting her as she carefully handed Noah over. Martha cradled him with practiced ease, studying his face with intense concentration. Noah, typically wary with strangers, gazed back at the elderly woman with unusual focus, his tiny hands reaching up to touch her silver braid. "He has the sight," Martha murmured, more to herself than to her visitors. Like his great-grandmother, like you, she added, looking pointedly at Rachel. The sight, Rachel repeated, confused. Martha returned Noah to Rachel's arms before settling into a rocking chair opposite them. The ability to see beyond the veil that separates most humans from the natural world, to communicate with those we foolishly call lesser beings. Eleanor had it strongly. It's why Athena formed such a powerful bond with her. Daniel leaned forward. You knew Eleanor? You can't be old enough to be the Martha she wrote about. A smile creased Martha's face, revealing deep lines etched by decades of weather and wisdom. That was my grandmother, Martha Whitefeather. I am Martha Redfeather, named in her honor. But I knew your grandmother well, child, she said to Rachel. She came to me often after my grandmother passed, seeking guidance, bringing gifts from her garden. A remarkable woman. Rachel reached into her coat and withdrew Eleanor's journal. We found this yesterday. It tells the story of how she saved a bear cub named Athena, and how that created some kind of bond between our families. Martha nodded slowly. My grandmother called it Caswenta, the silver chain of friendship that binds together different peoples. In the old stories, it connected the nations of humans, but the oldest tales speak of bonds between humans and the animal nations as well. Such connections are rare now, when most humans have forgotten how to listen to the world around them. The journal mentions a debt of life, Daniel said, that the bears would watch over Eleanor's descendants. Is that why they've been visiting our baby? Martha rose from her chair and moved to a cedar chest in the corner of the room. From it, she retrieved a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. It's not as simple as a debt. When a life is saved through sacrifice and love, something more profound is created, a joining of destinies. She unwrapped the bundle, revealing a collection of items: a carved wooden bear, yellowed photographs, and a small leather pouch. She selected one photograph and handed it to Rachel. The black and white image showed a much younger Martha Redfeather, standing beside an elderly woman, presumably her grandmother, and between them, Eleanor Morgan, looking to be in her 30s. All three women were smiling, their arms linked together in friendship. This was taken the summer before my grandmother passed to the spirit world, Martha explained. By then, Athena had been visiting Eleanor for nearly 30 years. The connection had deepened beyond anything my grandmother had anticipated. But why Noah? Rachel asked, gently bouncing her son as he began to fuss. Why have the bears been so focused on our baby specifically? Martha's expression grew serious. May I see the journal? Rachel handed it over, and Martha flipped through the pages with careful fingers until she found what she was looking for. Here, she said, pointing to an entry. Did you read this part carefully? Rachel leaned closer to see the entry from October 3rd, 1953, the day her mother was born. Martha's finger pointed to a line Rachel had overlooked in her earlier reading. Dr. Harlow arrived hours later to find mother and child doing remarkably well, calling it a miracle. I don't understand, Rachel admitted. Eleanor was dying during childbirth, Martha explained solemnly. The bleeding wouldn't stop. In those days, without immediate medical intervention, such complications were often fatal for both mother and child. But Athena came, drawn by the bond they shared, and somehow led Eleanor to the yarrow plants that saved her life. But what does that have to do with Noah? Daniel pressed. Martha fixed her penetrating gaze on him. Your son would not exist if Athena hadn't saved Eleanor that day. Her daughter, your mother, she nodded to Rachel, would have died at birth. The entire future lineage was preserved by the bear's intervention. Rachel felt a chill run through her despite the cabin's warmth. So they're protecting Noah because, without Athena, he would never have been born. Partly, Martha acknowledged, but there's more. She reached for the leather pouch from her bundle and carefully opened it, revealing a small, yellowed tooth. This belonged to Athena. My grandmother collected it when Eleanor was treating the cub's infected leg. She kept it as a talisman, sensing even then that this bear was special. Martha held the tooth up to the firelight. My grandmother had visions about this bear and your family. She saw lives intertwined across generations, protection flowing both ways. The bears have been guarding your family for decades, but now the time approaches when your family must protect them in return. Protect them from what? Daniel asked, his voice tight with concern. Martha's eyes darkened. Development has been creeping closer to these ancient forests. The timber company that tried to buy your land last year. They've purchased thousands of acres to the north and east. The bears' territory is shrinking. Their ancient denning caves will be destroyed if the planned resort goes forward. Rachel and Daniel exchanged startled glances. They had indeed received a substantial offer for their property from Evergreen Development Corporation 10 months ago, an offer they had firmly rejected, having no desire to give up their family home. The corporation's environmental impact surveys conveniently overlook the fact that these woods contain one of the last healthy bear populations in the region, Martha continued. If their habitat is destroyed, Athena's descendants, your protectors, will disappear. The ancient bond will be broken. But what can we do? Rachel asked, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. We're just one family. We've protected our own land, but we can't stop a major development company. Martha's lips curved into a knowing smile. Can't you? Eleanor's journal doesn't tell the whole story. There are pages missing. Pages she entrusted to my keeping because she feared they might fall into the wrong hands. From the wooden chest, Martha withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. These are the missing pages. They detail something Eleanor discovered during her time nursing Athena back to health. Something that could change everything. With trembling fingers, Rachel accepted the envelope. Inside were 3 folded pages in her grandmother's familiar handwriting. As she unfolded them, several sketched maps fell into her lap. The pages detailed Eleanor's discovery of a network of caves deep in the forest, accessible only through a hidden entrance near the eastern creek. May 12, 1952, Rachel read aloud. While searching for Athena, who had wandered from the shed during the night, I followed her tracks to an extraordinary discovery. Behind a curtain of vines and seemingly solid rock face lies the entrance to an extensive cave system. Athena led me inside, seemingly eager to show me this secret place. The walls bear ancient markings, handprints, animal figures, symbols I don't recognize. This place feels sacred, untouched by modern hands. I've sketched the location but will tell no one but Thomas of its existence. Some places deserve to remain undisturbed. The next entry described Eleanor's return to the caves with Thomas, who had brought a camera to document the findings. May 15, 1952. Thomas believes the cave paintings could be thousands of years old, perhaps the oldest archaeological find in the state. He wanted to alert the university immediately, but I convinced him to wait. Something tells me these caves must be protected from public curiosity, at least for now. Athena seemed almost distressed when Thomas discussed bringing others here. There is a wisdom in her reactions that I cannot explain, but have learned to trust. The final page contained the most startling revelation. June 28, 1952. We've explored deeper into the cave system and made an astonishing discovery. A chamber deep within contains clear evidence of human habitation dating back perhaps 10,000 years, according to Thomas's estimation. More incredible still are the repeated images of humans and bears together, not in hunting scenes, but in what appear to be ceremonial or cooperative activities. Thomas says this contradicts everything known about prehistoric human-animal relationships in the region. If authenticated, these findings would be of immense archaeological significance. But even more compelling to me is what this suggests about the relationship between humans and bears in these mountains, a connection not forged in my lifetime, but merely rediscovered. Rachel looked up from the pages, her mind reeling. Archaeological discoveries on the land would halt development, she said slowly, understanding dawning. Martha nodded. Not just any archaeological site, potentially one of the most significant prehistoric finds in North America. Evidence of spiritual and practical cooperation between humans and bears dating back millennia. "Do these caves still exist?" Daniel asked, excitement building in his voice. "Could we find them?" "They exist," Martha confirmed, "but their location has been guarded by my family and yours for 3 generations. Eleanor made my grandmother and me promise never to reveal their existence unless absolutely necessary." "And now it's necessary," Rachel concluded. "Now it's necessary," Martha agreed. "But finding them won't be simple. The forest has changed in 70 years. Trees have fallen. New growth has obscured landmarks. Eleanor's maps provide clues, but we'll need guides," Daniel finished, understanding immediately. Martha smiled, her dark eyes twinkling in the firelight. "Now you begin to understand. The bears haven't just been watching over your son, Rachel Morgan. They've been waiting for you to be ready to follow them to the sacred place, ready to fulfill your part of the ancient bargain." Noah chose that moment to let out a happy gurgle, his tiny hands reaching toward the window. Rachel turned to see what had caught his attention. There, barely visible through the falling snow, stood 3 bears at the edge of Martha's clearing. The mother bear, her younger companion, and the ancient one with the gray muzzle. "Athena," Rachel whispered in awe. "But how can she still be alive?" "My grandmother's journal said she rescued her in 1952. That's over 70 years ago." Martha joined them at the window, her expression solemn. "The oldest brown bears can live into their 30s in the wild. If their habitat is destroyed, Athena's descendants, your protectors, will disappear. The ancient bond will be broken." "But what can we do?" Rachel asked, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. "We're just one family. We've protected our own land, but we can't stop a major development company." Martha's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Can't you?" "Eleanor's journal doesn't tell the whole story. There are pages missing. Pages she entrusted to my keeping because she feared they might fall into the wrong hands." From the wooden chest, Martha withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. "These are the missing pages. They detail something Eleanor discovered during her time nursing Athena back to health, something that could change everything." With trembling fingers, Rachel accepted the envelope. Inside were 3 folded pages in her grandmother's familiar handwriting. As she unfolded them, several sketched maps fell into her lap. The pages detailed Eleanor's discovery of a network of caves deep in the forest, accessible only through a hidden entrance near the eastern creek. "May 12th, 1952, Rachel read aloud. "While searching for Athena, who had wandered from the shed during the night, I followed her tracks to an extraordinary discovery. Behind a curtain of vines and seemingly solid rock face lies the entrance to an extensive cave system. Athena led me inside, seemingly eager to show me this secret place. The walls bear ancient markings, handprints, animal figures, symbols I don't recognize. This place feels sacred, untouched by modern hands. I've sketched the location but will tell no one but Thomas of its existence. Some places deserve to remain undisturbed." The next entry described Eleanor's return to the caves with Thomas, who had brought a camera to document the findings. May 15, 1952. Thomas believes the cave paintings could be thousands of years old, perhaps the oldest archaeological find in the state. He wanted to alert the university immediately, but I convinced him to wait. Something tells me these caves must be protected from public curiosity, at least for now. Athena seemed almost distressed when Thomas discussed bringing others here. There is a wisdom in her reactions that I cannot explain but have learned to trust. The final page contained the most startling revelation. June 28, 1952. We've explored deeper into the cave system and made an astonishing discovery. A chamber deep within contains clear evidence of human habitation dating back perhaps 10,000 years, according to Thomas's estimation. More incredible still are the repeated images of humans and bears together, not in hunting scenes, but in what appear to be ceremonial or cooperative activities. Thomas says this contradicts everything known about prehistoric human-animal relationships in the region. If authenticated, these findings would be of immense archaeological significance. But even more compelling to me is what this suggests about the relationship between humans and bears in these mountains. A connection not forged in my lifetime, but merely rediscovered. Rachel looked up from the pages, her mind reeling. Archaeological discoveries on the land would halt development, she said slowly, understanding dawning. Martha nodded. Not just any archaeological site, potentially one of the most significant prehistoric finds in North America. Evidence of spiritual and practical cooperation between humans and bears dating back millennia. Do these caves still exist? Daniel asked, excitement building in his voice. Could we find them? They exist, Martha confirmed. But their location has been guarded by my family and yours for 3 generations. Eleanor made my grandmother and me promise never to reveal their existence unless absolutely necessary. And now it's necessary, Rachel concluded. Now it's necessary, Martha agreed. But finding them won't be simple. The forest has changed in 70 years. Trees have fallen, new growth has obscured landmarks. Eleanor's maps provide clues, but we'll need guides, Daniel finished, understanding immediately. Martha smiled, her dark eyes twinkling in the firelight. Now you begin to understand. The bears haven't just been watching over your son, Rachel Morgan. They've been waiting for you to be ready to follow them to the sacred place, ready to fulfill your part of the ancient bargain. Noah chose that moment to let out a happy gurgle, his tiny hands reaching toward the window. Rachel turned to see what had caught his attention. There, barely visible through the falling snow, stood 3 bears at the edge of Martha's clearing. The mother bear, her younger companion, and the ancient one with the gray muzzle. Athena, Rachel whispered in awe. But how can she still be alive? My grandmother's journal said she rescued her in 1952. That's over 70 years ago. Martha joined them at the window, her expression solemn. The oldest brown bears can live into their 30s in the wild. Athena should have passed decades ago, yet she remains, held to this world by the power of the bond she shares with your family. But her time grows short, the completion of the circle approaches. What circle? Daniel asked, his arm protectively encircling Rachel and Noah. Life and death, giving and receiving, protection offered and returned, Martha replied cryptically. Athena cannot rest until her descendants are safe, until the sacred caves are protected forever. She turned to face them fully, her expression grave. Will you follow where they lead? Will you trust as your grandmother did? Rachel looked down at Noah, peacefully sleeping against her chest, then back at the 3 bears waiting patiently in the snow. In that moment, she felt a strange certainty, as if she could sense her grandmother's presence guiding her toward this decision. "We'll follow," she said firmly. "We'll protect the bears, just as they've protected us." Martha nodded approvingly. "Then we must prepare. The journey must be undertaken at the next full moon, 3 nights from now. The light will be necessary to find the hidden entrance, and the timing is auspicious." She moved to a cabinet and began gathering supplies. "You'll need these herbs for protection. The forest holds many secrets, not all of them benevolent." As Martha prepared bundles of dried plants and small pouches of mysterious powders, she shared more details about the history of the bears and the Morgan family. According to stories passed down through her grandmother, the bond between certain human lineages and animal nations had been common knowledge among her ancestors. These spiritual connections were seen as sacred trusts, ensuring balance between the human and natural worlds. When European settlers arrived, such beliefs were dismissed as primitive superstition, Martha explained. Over generations, most humans forgot how to listen, how to see beyond the veil, but some bloodlines retained the gift, including yours, Rachel. Your grandmother recognized it in you when you were just a child. She told me you spoke to birds and they seemed to answer." Rachel's eyes widened in surprise. "I remember that. I thought it was just a game we played. The birds would come when I called to them, and grandmother said they were telling me secrets." "They were," Martha confirmed. "And now your son carries that same gift, perhaps even more strongly. That's another reason the bears are drawn to him. They sense his ability to understand them, to bridge the gap between our worlds." As the afternoon waned, Martha shared a simple meal with them, a hearty stew that warmed them from within, and continued preparing them for what lay ahead. When it came time to depart, she pressed a small wooden box into Rachel's hands. "This contains items your grandmother left in my keeping, photographs, letters, and a special talisman she crafted from Athena's fur and a stone from the sacred cave. Wear it when you make the journey." Outside, the 3 bears had vanished, but their tracks in the snow formed a clear path leading back toward Rachel and Daniel's cottage. "Follow their signs," Martha instructed as they prepared to leave. "They will guide you home safely, and when the time comes to the caves, I will join you at your cottage on the night of the full moon." As they made their way back through the snowy forest, Rachel felt a profound shift in her understanding of her family's history and her own place in the world. The bears weren't just animals that had formed an unusual attachment to her child. They were the custodians of an ancient covenant, partners in a relationship that transcended the ordinary boundaries between humans and wildlife. "Do you think we're crazy?" she asked Daniel as they carefully navigated the slippery path. Following bears into the forest, believing in mystical bonds spanning generations. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, adjusting Noah's carrier to shield him from a gust of cold wind. 2 days ago, I would have said yes, he finally answered. But after what we've witnessed, the bear knowing about the nightshade, finding your grandmother's journal, seeing Athena still alive against all odds, I think we'd be crazy not to believe. They walked in contemplative silence for a while, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The forest around them seemed different now, not just a collection of trees and wildlife, but a living tapestry of relationships and histories stretching back thousands of years. "Daniel," Rachel said suddenly, stopping in her tracks. "Look at this." She pointed to the bear tracks they had been following. What she had initially taken for a random pattern now revealed itself as something more deliberate. At regular intervals, the largest bear, presumably Athena, had made deeper, more distinctive prints, creating what appeared to be a specific pattern through the forest. "It's like she's marking a trail for us," Daniel observed, kneeling to examine the tracks more closely. Not just back to our cottage, but a path to the caves, Rachel finished. She's already showing us the way. The implications of this deliberate communication sent a shiver through Rachel that had nothing to do with the cold. The bears weren't just intelligent, they were strategic, forward-thinking, capable of complex planning. Everything she thought she knew about the natural world seemed to shift beneath her feet, revealing deeper layers of connection and consciousness than she had ever imagined. As they continued their journey homeward, the forest growing darker around them, Rachel felt both humbled and exhilarated by the task that lay ahead. In 3 days' time, they would follow these remarkable creatures to a place hidden for millennia, carrying forward a legacy of protection and mutual aid that had begun long before her grandmother's time. What she couldn't know was that other eyes were watching their progress through the woods, human eyes, cold with calculation and greed. The path they were forging toward protecting the bears and their ancient heritage would not be without obstacles or dangers. Forces were already gathering that would test the strength of the bond between the Morgan family and their Ursine guardians, threatening to sever the ancient connection forever. The journey back to their cottage took longer than expected, the fading daylight making navigation through the snowy forest increasingly difficult. Noah remained surprisingly content throughout, his eyes often tracking movements in the trees that neither Rachel nor Daniel could perceive. By the time they reached the clearing surrounding their home, twilight had deepened into night. The forest transformed into a landscape of silver and shadow under the waxing moon. "Look," Daniel whispered, pointing toward their porch. The 3 bears waited there, sentinels guarding their home. As Rachel and Daniel approached, the bears shifted to create a path to the door, their massive bodies radiating heat that melted the snow beneath them. The oldest bear, Athena, raised her grizzled head, dark eyes meeting Rachel's with unmistakable intelligence. "Thank you," Rachel said softly, the words feeling simultaneously inadequate and completely natural. "Thank you for waiting." Athena lowered her head in what could only be described as a nod, before turning her gaze to Noah, who had awakened and was staring at the ancient bear with fascination. A sound that was neither growl nor purr rumbled from Athena's chest. A gentle vocalization that brought tears to Rachel's eyes, though she couldn't have explained why. Once inside, they moved through their evening routine with a heightened awareness of the extraordinary nature of their situation. Daniel built a fire in the hearth, while Rachel prepared a simple dinner, both of them frequently glancing out the windows to where the bears maintained their vigil at the edge of the clearing. "We should call someone," Daniel said as they sat at their kitchen table, the wooden box from Martha placed between them. "If there really are prehistoric cave paintings that could halt the development project, we need archaeological experts to document them." Rachel nodded, turning Martha's wooden box in her hands without opening it. "But who can we trust?" Martha said Eleanor kept this secret for a reason. If word gets out before we have solid documentation, the development company could find ways to destroy the evidence or tie everything up in legal battles for years. What about Professor Abernathy? You interned with him at the university's archaeology department before Noah was born. He always struck me as someone with integrity. Rachel considered this. James Abernathy had been her mentor during her brief academic career before she'd chosen to focus on starting a family. He was respected in his field and known for his advocacy of indigenous archaeological sites. That could work, she agreed, but we should wait until after we've seen the caves ourselves. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with before we bring anyone else into this. Daniel reached across the table to take her hand. I've been thinking about what Martha said, about Noah having the sight like you and your grandmother. Have you ever felt it? this connection to animals that she described? Rachel was quiet for a long moment, memories surfacing that she had long dismissed as childhood imagination. When I was little, I used to have conversations with the birds in grandmother's garden. I would tell them my secrets, and they seemed to understand. Later, during my field studies in college, I had an uncanny ability to locate wildlife that others couldn't find. My professors called it good instincts. But maybe it was something more. She looked toward Noah's crib where their son slept peacefully. I've noticed how the wildlife around the cottage responds to him. The deer come closer when he's outside. Birds land nearby instead of flying away. I thought it was because he's quiet and stillness attracts them, but maybe he's calling them somehow, the way I used to. The conversation lingered in their minds as they prepared for bed, both exhausted from the day's revelations and experiences. Before sleeping, Rachel finally opened Martha's wooden box. Inside lay a collection of photographs showing Eleanor with various wildlife around the cottage, several letters tied with faded ribbon, and nestled in soft cloth, a small leather pouch on a cord. Inside the pouch was a smooth river stone with natural patterns resembling a bear's paw, wrapped partially in what could only be bear fur, coarse, dark brown, and surprisingly soft. A small note in Eleanor's handwriting accompanied it. To my dear granddaughter Rachel, who will understand when the time comes. Wear this when you walk between worlds. Rachel slipped the cord over her head, the pouch resting against her heart. The stone seemed to warm against her skin, though she told herself it was merely borrowing her body heat. As she drifted toward sleep, Noah secure in his crib nearby and Daniel's arm protectively around her waist, she thought she heard distant voices murmuring at the edge of consciousness. Not human voices, but something older, a language of growth and earth and ancient knowing. Miles away, in a luxurious office overlooking the city skyline, Victor Blackwood studied the photographs spread across his desk with growing irritation. The security company he'd hired to conduct routine surveillance of properties adjacent to his planned resort development had captured images of Rachel and Daniel Morgan following 3 bears through the forest. "Explain to me again why you're showing me pictures of bears," he demanded of the nervous young man standing before him. "Sir, these aren't ordinary bear sightings," James Harlow responded, adjusting his tie. As Evergreen Development Corporation's environmental compliance officer, he was accustomed to finding ways around wildlife regulations, not reporting concerning anomalies. Bears should be hibernating this time of year, especially with the recent snowfall, and they certainly shouldn't be displaying this kind of behavior with humans. Victor leaned back in his Italian leather chair, irritation giving way to calculation. The Morgans. They're the holdouts with that old cottage on the eastern boundary, correct? The ones who refused to sell even when we doubled our offer? Yes, sir. The property has been in their family for generations. But these images suggest something more concerning than sentimental attachment to land. James hesitated, aware that what he was about to say might sound ridiculous. The bears appeared to be interacting with them. Guiding them, even? Victor's eyebrows rose fractionally, the closest he came to displaying surprise. And this matters to our project because if there's evidence of an unusual wildlife phenomenon on or near the development site, it could trigger additional environmental reviews. The presence of unique animal behavior could be grounds for special protection status, especially if it involves an indigenous cultural component. Victor's mouth tightened. After 3 years of planning, millions in investment, and countless bureaucratic hurdles overcome through carefully applied pressure and strategic donations, he wasn't about to let his vision for Evergreen Mountain Resort be derailed by some backward family and their peculiar relationship with local wildlife. "Where did they go today?" he asked, studying the surveillance photos more carefully. "To visit an elderly woman living deeper in the forest. Martha Redfeather. She's some kind of local herbalist or healer, according to our background research. Indigenous heritage, keeps to herself mostly." Victor tapped his manicured fingers on the polished mahogany desk. "I want continuous surveillance on the Morgans and this Redfeather woman. Every movement, every visitor, every unusual animal activity. And James," he added, his voice dropping to a silky softness that was more threatening than any shout, "this project will proceed on schedule. If these people are attempting to fabricate environmental concerns to block us, I want evidence. If they're trespassing on the parcels we've already acquired, I want documentation we can use." "Yes, sir," James replied, collecting the photographs. "And if they do find something legitimately concerning—" Victor's smile was cold and didn't reach his eyes. "Then we'll need to address it before it becomes a matter of public record, won't we?" "Nothing can stop progress, James, especially not ancient superstitions and forest creatures." After James departed, Victor swiveled in his chair to gaze out at the city lights. His resort would transform the regional economy, bringing jobs and prosperity to an area that had relied too long on dying industries like logging and small-scale agriculture. If a few bears needed to be relocated and a couple of stubborn landowners pressured into compliance with modern realities, so be it. He reached for his phone, scrolling to a contact labeled only as insurance. Some situations required specialists, people who understood that environmental regulations and property rights were flexible concepts when sufficient resources were applied to the problem. He drafted a text message. "Potential complication at Whispering Woods site. Your services may be required. Details to follow." Dawn broke over the Morgan cottage with unusual brilliance, sunlight refracting through ice crystals in the air to create a phenomenon known as diamond dust, tiny, glittering particles that seemed to hang suspended around the clearing. Rachel stood on the porch, Noah bundled against her chest, watching the ethereal display with wonder. The bears had departed during the night, leaving only their massive tracks in the snow as evidence of their vigil. But Rachel didn't doubt they remained nearby, watching, waiting for the approaching full moon when they would guide the family to the ancient caves. "Coffee?" Daniel asked, joining them on the porch with steaming mugs in hand. He had dark circles under his eyes, evidence of a restless night punctuated by intense dreams he couldn't quite remember upon waking. "Thanks," Rachel accepted the mug gratefully, sipping the hot liquid as she gazed across their property. "Did you notice? The birds are back." Indeed, the clearing was alive with avian activity. Chickadees, nuthatches, and winter wrens flitting from branch to branch, their calls creating a cheerful chorus. Several bold chickadees had even landed on the porch railing, regarding the humans with curious black eyes. "They're not usually this active in winter," Daniel observed, watching a downy woodpecker work methodically up the trunk of a nearby pine. "They're excited," Rachel said without thinking. "Something's happening. They can feel it." Daniel gave her a searching look. "You can tell that?" "What they're feeling." Rachel hesitated, uncertain how to explain the knowing that had settled into her awareness since placing Eleanor's talisman around her neck. "Not exactly. It's more like impressions, feelings that aren't quite my own." She shifted Noah in her arms, noticing how his gaze tracked the movements of a particular chickadee that seemed to be performing an elaborate display for his benefit. "Does that sound crazy? After everything we've learned?" "Not at all." Daniel sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about our next steps. We should prepare for this journey to the caves methodically. If they're as significant as Martha suggested, we need proper documentation. Photographs, video, measurements. I'll dig out my old survey equipment from the garage. The morning passed in careful preparation. Daniel located his professional camera equipment from his days as a wilderness photographer, along with flashlights, extra batteries, and the mapping tools he'd used during his previous career as an environmental surveyor. Rachel went through Eleanor's journal again, copying the landmarks noted on the hand-drawn maps onto their modern topographical charts of the area. Shortly before noon, a distinctive rumble disturbed the quiet activity. Daniel moved to the window, his expression darkening as he recognized the approaching vehicle. "It's Harlow from the development company," he told Rachel, who quickly placed Noah in his playpen before joining her husband at the window. James Harlow was impeccably dressed as always, his expensive wool coat and polished boots looking out of place against the rugged forest backdrop. He navigated the snowy path to their door with evident distaste, brushing invisible specks from his sleeves before knocking. Daniel opened the door without invitation, his stance deliberately blocking the entrance. "Mr. Harlow, I believe we made our position clear during your last visit. The property is not for sale." Harlow offered a practiced smile. "Mr. Morgan, Mrs. Morgan, lovely to see you both again. I'm not here about purchasing your property, though our offer remains open, of course. I'm actually conducting a routine survey of wildlife activity in the area. We've had reports of unusual bear movements." Something in his tone sent warning signals through Rachel's mind. She stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Daniel. "What kind of reports?" "Bears active during winter, approaching human habitations. Very concerning from a public safety perspective." Harlow's gaze drifted past them, scanning what was visible of their home's interior. "I don't suppose you've noticed anything unusual. According to local rangers, your property would be right in the path of any bear movement between the eastern ridge and the valley." "We haven't seen anything concerning," Daniel replied evenly. "If we do, we'll certainly contact the proper wildlife authorities." Of course. Harlow's smile remained fixed in place. "While I'm here, I should mention that our company has acquired several parcels to the north and east of your property. For your own safety, you might want to avoid wandering too far in those directions. We've begun preliminary survey work, and some areas may be hazardous." "We'll keep that in mind," Daniel said, making no effort to disguise his skepticism. As Harlow turned to leave, he paused, as if struck by a casual afterthought. "I understand you paid a visit to Martha Redfeather yesterday. Fascinating woman, I hear. Something of a local legend." The deliberate mention sent a chill through Rachel that had nothing to do with the winter air. How could he possibly know about their visit unless they were being watched? "Family friend," she replied smoothly, fighting to keep her voice casual. "We've known her for years." Harlow nodded, his eyes calculating despite his pleasant expression. "Well, do give her my regards if you see her again. Evergreen Development has a dedicated Indigenous Cultural Preservation Fund. We'd be very interested in documenting any historical or cultural knowledge she might be willing to share." After he departed, Rachel and Daniel remained in the doorway, watching until his luxury SUV disappeared down the narrow access road. "They're watching us," Daniel said quietly. "That wasn't a coincidence." Rachel nodded, her hand instinctively reaching for Eleanor's talisman beneath her sweater. "We need to warn Martha, and we need to move quickly. If they suspect what we're looking for, they might try to find it first," Daniel finished grimly, "and destroy any evidence that could halt their development." The chickadee that had been performing for Noah earlier returned to the porch railing, its tiny body vibrating with agitation as it released a rapid series of alarm calls. Rachel listened, her head tilted slightly, receiving impressions that weren't quite words but conveyed clear meaning nonetheless. "We're not alone," she whispered, her gaze sweeping the tree line. "Someone's still watching." Daniel followed her gaze, but saw nothing unusual in the dense forest surrounding their clearing. "Are you sure?" Before Rachel could answer, Noah let out a distressed wail from his playpen. She rushed to him, finding her son red-faced and crying, his little hands reaching desperately toward the north window. Following his gaze, Rachel caught a momentary glimpse of movement among the trees. Not the lumbering shape of a bear, but the shadow of something distinctly human, slipping between trunks before vanishing into the deeper forest. "Daniel," she called urgently. "Call the ranger station. Tell them we've spotted trespassers on our property." As Daniel made the call, Rachel soothed Noah, whose cries gradually subsided, though he continued staring at the window with unusual intensity. "What did you see, little one?" she murmured against his downy head. "What are you trying to tell me?" Looking into her son's eyes, Rachel was struck by their unusual clarity, as if some ancient wisdom gazed out from behind an infant's innocent features. In that moment, she understood with absolute certainty that they couldn't wait for the full moon as Martha had advised. The forces gathering against them were moving too quickly, too decisively. They needed to find the caves now, before their opponents discovered the secret that had been protected for generations. The bears would have to guide them tonight, moon or no moon, or everything Eleanor and Martha had fought to preserve might be lost forever. What Rachel couldn't know was that Victor Blackwood was already 3 steps ahead of her. While Harlow had distracted them with his transparent visit, other operatives had placed discreet tracking devices on their vehicles. Tiny, sophisticated surveillance equipment now nestled within the eaves of their cottage, capturing every word, every plan. And deep in the forest, guided by old mining maps and geological surveys, Blackwood's insurance specialists were already searching methodically for cave systems that might match the description Martha had provided. The race for the ancient secret had begun, and the stakes were higher than either side fully realized. For what lay hidden in those caves wasn't merely archaeological evidence that could halt a development project. It was the physical confirmation of a covenant between species that, if properly understood, could transform humanity's relationship with the natural world forever. Twilight descended rapidly, the forest darkening under heavy clouds that obscured the stars. Rachel stood on the porch, Noah securely fastened against her chest in a carrier, the talisman from Eleanor hanging visibly around her neck. Daniel had loaded their backpacks with documentation equipment, first aid supplies, water, and emergency provisions. Both carried powerful flashlights, though Rachel harbored a strange certainty that light might not be their greatest need in the hours ahead. "Are we really doing this?" Daniel asked quietly, adjusting the straps of his pack. "Following bears through a forest at night with our baby?" Rachel met his gaze steadily. "If what Martha told us is true, Noah is safer with the bears than anywhere else right now. And we can't wait. Harlow's visit wasn't a coincidence. They're looking for the caves too." As if summoned by their conversation, 3 distinct shapes emerged from the tree line. The bears approached slowly, deliberately, their massive forms somehow both intimidating and reassuring in the gathering darkness. Athena, her gray muzzle distinguishing her from the others, came forward to stand directly before Rachel. The ancient bear rose slightly on her hind legs, bringing her face level with Noah's. The baby reached out fearlessly, his tiny fingers brushing the coarse fur of Athena's cheek in a gesture so tender it brought tears to Rachel's eyes. "We're ready," Rachel said softly, addressing Athena directly. "Please, show us the way." The bears turned as one, moving toward the eastern edge of the property. Daniel took a deep breath, switched on his flashlight, and reached for Rachel's hand. Together, they stepped off the porch and into the wild darkness, following their extraordinary guides. The journey through the nighttime forest was unlike anything they had experienced before. The bears moved with surprising grace despite their size, finding passages through the underbrush that would have been invisible to human eyes alone. Twice they stopped, growling softly in warning, before changing course. Detours that Rachel later realized must have helped them avoid Blackwood's search teams. Noah remained remarkably calm throughout, occasionally making soft cooing sounds when the bears looked back to check on their progress. The forest itself seemed to respond to their passage, branches shifting to allow easier movement, nocturnal creatures falling silent as they passed before resuming their activities in their wake. After nearly 2 hours of careful navigation through increasingly rugged terrain, they reached a steep rock face partially obscured by ancient hemlocks. To human eyes, it appeared to be a solid wall of stone, but Athena approached it confidently, pushing through a curtain of vines to reveal a narrow opening. "The entrance to the caves," Daniel whispered, awe evident in his voice, just like Eleanor described. Athena entered first, followed by the younger bears. Rachel and Daniel exchanged a glance, both silently acknowledging the extraordinary trust they were placing in these wild creatures as they ducked through the opening and into the darkness beyond. Inside, the narrow passage quickly opened into a larger chamber where the air was surprisingly warm and rich with earthy scents. Their flashlight beams revealed walls covered in ochre and charcoal markings, handprints, animal figures, and geometric patterns that even to their untrained eyes were clearly ancient. "Daniel," Rachel breathed, "these are exactly like the paintings Eleanor described. Look at the dates carved here." She pointed to a series of notches and symbols near one particularly vivid depiction of humans and bears together. "If I'm interpreting this correctly, these could be over 12,000 years old." Daniel was already photographing methodically, his background in environmental documentation guiding his work. "This is extraordinary. These images don't show humans hunting bears. They're working alongside them, gathering food together, sharing shelters." The bears waited patiently as the humans explored the initial chamber, occasionally nudging them toward particular images, as if highlighting their significance. Then Athena moved toward a smaller passage at the back of the cave, clearly indicating they should follow. This tunnel descended steeply, requiring them to proceed with care on the slippery stone surface. After several minutes of careful descent, they emerged into a vast underground chamber that took their breath away. Here, the ancient artists had created a comprehensive mural covering the entirety of the curved walls, a continuous narrative depicting the evolution of the relationship between humans and bears over thousands of years. The images showed bears leading humans to honey, humans tending to injured bears, joint celebrations around fires, and what appeared to be ceremonial exchanges of gifts. At the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, worn smooth by countless hands over millennia. Atop it rested a carving of such exquisite craftsmanship that it seemed impossible it could have been created by prehistoric tools. A mother bear with a human child nestled against her side, both figures depicted with profound tenderness. "The covenant," Rachel whispered, understanding flowering within her. This wasn't just about Eleanor saving Athena. This bond has existed for thousands of years. As Daniel documented everything with photographs and video, Rachel moved around the chamber, Eleanor's journal open in her hands, comparing her grandmother's sketches with the actual site. The similarities were exact. Eleanor had faithfully recorded everything she had discovered all those years ago. Athena approached the altar, rising onto her hind legs to place one massive paw beside the carving. Her eyes met Rachel's, and in that moment, something extraordinary happened. Rachel felt her consciousness expand, memories that were not her own flooding through her mind. She saw generations of her ancestors meeting with bears in this sacred space, renewing the ancient promise of mutual protection and respect. She witnessed the first covenant being formed, a prehistoric human child, lost and starving, being saved by a mother bear who had recently lost her cub. The initial suspicion and fear giving way to recognition of shared needs and capacities for compassion. The vision shifted, showing her something more urgent. Blackwood's men moving through the forest, drawing closer to their location with each passing minute. Modern technology guiding them where ancient spirits had previously kept the secret hidden. "Daniel," she gasped as the vision released her. "We don't have much time. They're coming." Even as she spoke, they heard voices echoing from the entrance tunnel. Harsh, urgent human voices giving commands, the beams of powerful flashlights sweeping the outer chamber. "Hide," Daniel whispered urgently, pulling Rachel and Noah behind a rock formation. But Athena and the other bears made no move to conceal themselves. Instead, they positioned themselves between the tunnel entrance and the altar, forming a living barrier against the intruders. The first man to enter the main chamber wore tactical gear and carried both a flashlight and what appeared to be a tranquilizer rifle. He froze at the sight of the three bears, raising his weapon instinctively. "Sir," he called back over his shoulder, "we've got a situation." Victor Blackwood stepped into the chamber, flanked by two more security personnel and James Harlow. His cold eyes surveyed the scene, the ancient paintings, the altar, and the three bears standing in protective formation. "Remarkable," he said after a moment, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Genuine, prehistoric cave art. This would indeed complicate our development plans if it became public knowledge." He turned to one of his men. "Prepare the charges. We'll collapse this chamber and report that we found an unstable natural cave formation that had to be sealed for safety reasons." "You can't do that." Rachel emerged from hiding, unable to remain silent in the face of such calculated destruction. "This is a priceless archaeological treasure. It belongs to humanity's shared heritage." Blackwood's expression registered surprise, then calculating assessment. "Mrs. Morgan, how convenient. Trespassing on soon-to-be corporate property with your infant? Child Services might have questions about your parenting choices." "This isn't your property," Daniel stated firmly, joining his wife. "And these caves will never be destroyed. I've been live-streaming our entire exploration to a secure server. University archaeologists, indigenous rights groups, and environmental organizations are watching right now. If anything happens to us or this site, they'll know exactly who's responsible." Blackwood's confident expression faltered slightly. "You're bluffing." Daniel held up his camera with its small transmitting light glowing steadily. "Modern technology, quite useful for protecting ancient treasures." As the standoff intensified, Noah began to cry. Not his usual hungry or tired cry, but something more primal. The sound echoed through the chamber, activating something in the ancient walls themselves. The paintings seemed to shimmer in the flashlight beams, the images of humans and bears almost appearing to move. Athena responded to the baby's cries with a deep, rumbling vocalization that was neither threat nor comfort, but something more profound. A sound that seemed to resonate with the very stone around them. The other bears joined in, creating a harmonic vibration that filled the chamber with sound. One of Blackwood's security men panicked, firing his tranquilizer dart toward Athena. Time seemed to slow as the projectile arced through the air, and then impossibly stopped. The dart hung suspended for a moment before dropping harmlessly to the stone floor. Martha Redfeather stepped from the shadows of a passage none of them had noticed, her silver hair unbound around her shoulders, her eyes reflecting the flashlight beams like those of a nocturnal animal. "This place is protected by forces you cannot comprehend," she addressed Blackwood directly. "Forces that have endured for thousands of years and will continue long after your bones have returned to the earth." Blackwood recovered quickly, his expression hardening. "Charming theatrics, but we live in a world of corporate law and property rights, not superstition and wildlife worship." "Do we?" Martha challenged, moving to stand beside Athena. "Are you so certain of the world you think you understand?" She placed her hand on Athena's massive head, and the impossible happened. The ancient bear began to transform, not physically but perceptually. Those watching saw both bear and human simultaneously, as if two realities were overlapping. For a breathtaking moment, Athena appeared as a dignified, elderly woman with knowing eyes and silver-streaked hair, her hand extended toward Noah. The security personnel stumbled backward in shock. Harlow dropped his flashlight, its beam spinning crazily across the cave walls. Even Blackwood's confident facade cracked, his eyes widening as he confronted something beyond his materialist understanding of the world. "What you see is what humans once knew and have forgotten," Martha explained, her voice gentle despite the power of the moment. "The boundaries between species are not as fixed as we believe. The Covenant recognizes this truth, that we are all related, all connected, all responsible for each other's survival." Rachel stepped forward, Eleanor's talisman glowing with the soft light against her chest. She placed Noah directly before Athena, an act of absolute trust. "The Covenant continues through my son," she said clearly, "as it has for thousands of years, through my grandmother, through me, and now through him." Noah reached toward Athena with perfect trust, his tiny hand meeting the bear's massive paw in a touch that seemed to release a wave of energy through the chamber. The cave paintings glowed briefly with their own inner light, the scenes of human-bear cooperation illuminated as if freshly created. Blackwood, his worldview fundamentally challenged but his ambition undiminished, reached for his phone. "This changes nothing legally. I still have the permits, the land rights." His words cut off, as his phone screen displayed nothing but a continuous stream of incoming messages. Environmental agencies, archaeological authorities, indigenous rights organizations, and media outlets, all simultaneously reaching out about the remarkable archaeological discovery just live-streamed from Whispering Woods. "How?" he began, looking accusingly at Daniel. Daniel shrugged, though his eyes reflected understanding beyond his words. "Technology works in mysterious ways, especially around here." The standoff resolved not with violence, but with the weight of accumulated evidence and witnesses beyond the cave. Blackwood and his men retreated, their immediate plans thwarted by the sudden international attention focused on the site. As they departed, Martha turned to Rachel and Daniel. "You've done what Eleanor hoped you would. The Covenant is renewed, and the caves will now be protected not just by secrecy, but by worldwide recognition of their significance." "But how did everyone learn about it so quickly?" Rachel asked, looking at Daniel's camera. "Were you really live streaming?" Daniel shook his head. "The camera was recording locally, but there was no transmission. We're too deep underground for any signal." Martha smiled enigmatically. "The bears have their own ways of communicating. And today, those ways reached further than ever before." In the months that followed, the Whispering Woods Cave Complex was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site and protected indigenous cultural treasure. A joint management agreement between local indigenous nations, archaeological authorities, and wildlife conservation groups ensured that the caves would be both preserved and respected, with limited ceremonial access permitted. Evergreen Development Corporation, facing international scrutiny and a catastrophic drop in share value, abandoned their resort plans. Victor Blackwood resigned under pressure, his reputation irreparably damaged by leaked internal communications revealing his plans to destroy the archaeological site. The Morgan Cottage became a modest welcome center for the newly established Whispering Woods Cultural Heritage Preserve. Rachel, drawing on her background in archaeology, served as educational director, while Daniel documented the site's natural and cultural significance through his photography. And Noah grew, surrounded by both human knowledge and wild wisdom. The bears continued their visits, though less frequently and more discreetly now that their existence was known to the wider world. Athena remained his special guardian until her peaceful passing the following winter, an event marked by a ceremony in the sacred cave attended by both humans and bears. On Noah's 5th birthday, Rachel found him sitting on the porch steps in earnest conversation with a young bear cub that had approached from the forest edge. When she asked what they were discussing, Noah looked up with eyes that held wisdom far beyond his years. "I was telling her about great-grandma Eleanor," he explained matter-of-factly, "and about Athena. She needed to know the story so she can tell it to her cubs someday." Rachel sat beside her son, watching the interaction with a heart full of wonder and gratitude. The covenant that had begun in prehistoric times continued through her child, bridging the divide between human and wild, past and future, spoken and unspoken languages of the heart. That night, as she tucked Noah into bed, he asked a question that brought tears to her eyes with its simple profundity. "Mom, are we part bear or are bears part human?" Rachel thought of Eleanor's journal, of Martha's teachings, of the ancient paintings depicting a relationship that defied contemporary understanding of species boundaries. "I think," she answered carefully, "that we are all part of something larger than human or bear, something that remembers when we forget, something that connects when we separate, something that endures when we think all is lost." She touched the talisman that still hung around her neck, its stone warm against her fingers. The bears remembered when we forgot. They kept their promise across generations, waiting for us to remember too. Outside, beneath the light of a full moon, a mother bear paused at the edge of the forest clearing, her cub playing beside her. She raised her head toward the cottage window where the light still burned, acknowledging the continuing bond between their families. Not a debt to be paid, but a covenant to be honored, a shared commitment to protect each other and the land that sustained them both. For, in the end, the most shocking thing about the mother bear who visited the human baby wasn't that such connection could exist between species traditionally seen as adversaries. The truly shocking revelation was that such connections had always existed, woven into the fabric of the natural world since time immemorial, waiting patiently for humanity to remember what we had once known but forgotten in our rush toward progress and separation. The bears had remembered. And now, through Noah and the generations that would follow, the humans would remember too.